The Sigma 18-50 is a very promising lens for the Fujifilm X-mount system. With this lens, they've taken a constant f2.8 aperture like in the 16-55 and put it into a lens the size of the 18-55, which sounds too good to be true. For the past few weeks, I've had the opportunity to try this lens out and see how it performs. Unfortunately, I was just borrowing it, so I'll only be able to make a few first impressions. But I'll share with you guys what I think about the build, the image quality, and functionality of this lens. We'll also talk about how it stacks up against Fuji's own 18-55 and 16-55. Let's get started. General impressions. When I first unboxed this lens, I was impressed with the build quality. Unlike the Fuji lenses, it's got a matte finish, which makes it nice to hold and look at. I was also surprised at how small the lens was. It's very comparable to something like the 18-55, but just a tad thinner. For indication, it's got a smaller filter size of 55mm as opposed to the 18-55's 58mm. Another thing I noticed was how stiff the focus ring was. When compared to the 18-55, the 18-55 zooms in and out, quick and smooth. The Sigma 18-50, however, is a bit stiffer, meaning there isn't much zooming if you want to zoom. All it takes is a slight turn to switch focal lengths, which kind of makes sense because the focal length markings on this lens are very close together, which makes it more impractical to have a looser zoom ring. So it's not a negative, it just takes some time getting used to. Similarly, the zoom ring turns opposite towards the 18-55. On the 18-55, you push right to zoom in and out, and on the 18-50, you push left. This also took some time getting used to. Something I like about this lens, however, is that it has a marking for the 28mm focal length. This is a focal length I personally like, and so that makes it a nice aspect of the lens. Both the 18-55 and the 16-55 don't have this marking. Of course, you don't need that marking to shoot at that focal length, but having it is nice. Another thing to point out is that there's no aperture ring. Where you would normally find an aperture ring, the Sigma 18-50 has its manual focusing ring. So to change apertures, you'll have to use your camera body. I personally prefer having an aperture ring on my lenses. It's part of why I like shooting Fujifilm. Many of their lenses have manual aperture rings with clicks and markings. Again, it's not a good or bad thing, more of a preference, but this is something I had to get used to as well. So overall first impressions of the lens, I found the build quality to be quite good. The lens has a few things that I'm not quite used to yet, but none of which should pose a real problem for you. Performance. Let's start with general image quality. For the past few weeks, I've taken this lens out a couple of times to test its image quality. Again, I've not been able to use it for very long, so I only have a few photos. But overall, the image quality is solid. The lens is a good, solid, and sharp one, and I haven't noticed many differences in terms of image quality between this lens and my usual ones. But you guys know I'm no pixel peeper. I care more about functionality and usability than pure image quality. Let's talk aperture. A big selling point for this lens is its constant f2.8 aperture. Simply having that option to shoot with is really nice. Lenses like the 18-55 have a variable aperture, which makes it kind of annoying when you have to shoot and change your exposure every time you want to change focal lengths. So usually what I end up doing is I keep my aperture at f4 and just leave it at that, but that means that I don't get the benefit of shooting at the wider aperture. Again, not too big of an issue for me because my personal photography has been revolving around f4. I noticed that f4 is a good all-around aperture to shoot at, whether it be daytime or sunset photography. I can get enough of the frame in focus while still letting light in. So I think the Sigma's wider aperture would be something that's very useful if you're more into street photography or portrait photography, both of which I haven't been doing too much of lately, so I can't speak too much on that. I would, however, like to test it in more of those scenarios when I do go on more camping trips or get back into street photography again. So the point is, the constant wide aperture is a nice addition. I personally don't need it too much, but I think a lot of you guys could benefit from this. Autofocus. Now in terms of autofocus, this lens is fast and accurate. I think it did even better than the 18-55. I tried taking a few thumbnail photos with both of these lenses, and where the 18-55 struggled, the 18-50 did pretty well. Which actually makes sense because the 18-50 is a much older lens. But overall, the autofocus of this lens is pretty good. And I don't think you'll have too many problems when it comes to autofocus for photography specifically. Videography, I haven't tested enough of that to give you guys an accurate viewpoint on that. But as far as performance goes, the lens is very good. Image quality is good, f2.8 is nice, and autofocus is great. I personally got nothing to complain about, but would like to test it in more scenarios in the future if I get a chance again. How does it stack up? If you've been following this channel for a while now, you'll know that I've had both the 18-55 and the 16-55. I've never had the 16-80, so I can't really give any opinion on that lens. But these would be the main lenses you'd be looking at if you're looking for a solid standard zoom lens for your Fujifilm X-mount system. I know it was just announced that Fujifilm plans to update the 18-55, but we don't have enough details on it yet to really give an accurate assumption of whether or not that's a great option. But when compared to both the 18-55 and the 16-55, the Sigma 18-50 is a great option. It's got a constant f2.8 aperture, much like the 16-55, packaged into something the size of the 18-55. Similarly, its autofocus and image quality doesn't lose out when compared to these two lenses. All three are good. There are a few things it's missing, however. Those are the OIS of the 18-55, the weather sealing of the 16-55, it's missing 2mm on the wider end and 5mm on the telephoto end, and it doesn't have an aperture ring. Let's go through each of these. Image stabilization is something that's important when shooting video or in low light. Now, unlike the 18-55, the Sigma 18-50 doesn't have image stabilization, meaning it might not be as good for video, but it does have a constant wider f2.8 aperture, meaning it shouldn't have any problems in low light. So there's a caveat to both. I think if you're a pure photographer, it should be fine, but if you're a video or hybrid shooter, you should probably consider some other lens. As for the weather sealing, I'm not entirely sure if there is any or not. I looked online and some places say that it's partially weather sealed, so I'm just gonna go with that. Now, the 16-55 for sure is weather sealed, so if you're looking for something to shoot in rain or wind often, I would go with something like that. As for the focal range, this lens has slightly less zoom on both ends. When compared to the 16-55, we're losing out on 2mm on the wide end and 5mm on the telephoto end when compared to both of these lenses. So that's just a small thing, but something to take note of. And finally, there's no aperture ring. So you can determine whether or not these are caveats or deal breakers for you. For me personally, the 18-55 suits most of my needs. I value the OIS, it comes in handy a lot for video, and I don't need the constant f2.8 aperture as much as I thought I would. As for the 16-55, I have since sold it because it's too big. So I may pick up the Sigma 18-50 in the future, but as of right now, I don't really need it. Which should you buy? Overall, the Sigma 18-50 is a nice little lens. Many people have compared it to being a bag full of primes, and it certainly feels that way. If you're trying to find a zoom lens for your Fujifilm X-mount system and can't decide between these three lenses, here are a few questions you should ask. How important is a constant f2.8 aperture to me? How important is size for me? How important is price for me? If you care about a constant f2.8 aperture, grab this lens or the 16-55. If size is important, grab this lens or the 18-55. And if price is the most important, grab the 18-55. So those were my first impressions on this lens. I hope this helped any of you guys who are looking into buying this lens. If it did, please share this with a friend you think it might also help. Also, my new photography zine, The Sinking Sun, is finally out. I think we have a few more days left for pre-order, so if you haven't gotten your copy yet, order it now because you'll also get this big 11x14 fine art print that goes with it. So if you're interested, grab your copy while they're still here. And as always guys, thank you so much for watching. Have a great day. Peace.